What really took place with President Biden's recent trip to Israel and to the city of Jerusalem? Because this was supposed to be a time to unite peoples, not divide them. But no. Of course, he did just the opposite. President Biden took his entourage to the east side of Jerusalem. Now remember, Jerusalem has and is an undivided city since 1967. And U.S. policy, for the most part, has kept that status quo for the city of Jerusalem. Jews and Arabs, Christians, and people of all walks of life and faith are united in that city. Maybe they don't all feel the same about a solution, but nevertheless, they have freedom of movement, they all vote, they take the same bus transportation, taxis, and go to the restaurants, and it's an open city for all peoples. President Biden took his entourage to the Augusta Victoria Hospital that sits on the Mount of Olives. Rather than unite the people of Jerusalem together, Jews and Arabs alike, he actually put a division, a divisive tool between them. Because, for instance, he not only did not permit Israeli officials to accompany him, but on their vehicles they removed every Israeli state flag, and Jerusalem is part of the sovereign state of Israel today. Israel today is inhabited by Israeli Jews and Israeli Arab citizens, as well as others that are joined together in that nation. But beyond that, he also refused Israeli reporters to accompany his press pool. But do you actually think that Israeli journalists and reporters don't know what went on? Of course we knew what was going on the whole time. But this was sending a very strong signal. And here is what President Biden said in his speech from the Augusta Victoria Hospital. Quote, "My background and the background of my family is Irish American, and we have a long history of not fundamentally unlike the Palestinian people with Great Britain and their attitude towards Irish Catholics over the years." That is so blasphemous in my opinion, because what he was doing in East Jerusalem amongst the Arabs was comparing the Israeli Jews to an imperialism like Britain in the old days. And so that Israel is the cause of all the problems in the Middle East. Israel is the cause of Iranian aggression in the Middle East and terrorism. Israel is the whole problem, the exact opposite of the way he behaved around Prime Minister Yair Lapid and the rest of the Israeli cabinet that he met. This is divisive. This is what's dividing the people of Israel and not contributing to its healthy economy and healthy status amongst its people. So let's talk about this two-state solution that everybody's trying to push and shove down Israel, the Israeli Jews, and the Palestinian Arabs' throats. First of all, I want to explain to you something that you all must understand. There are Israeli Jewish citizens and Israeli Arab citizens. And then beyond, under the Palestinian Authority, is what we call Palestinian Arabs. They do not vote in Israeli elections. However, Israeli Arabs do vote in Israeli elections. And some would say it's a Trojan horse in our midst. Nevertheless, they have freedom to vote as they please. But let's go back to the origin of the word Palestinian, because it comes from the Hebrew word plishtim, which means invaders. Yes, to polesh means to occupy. Someone who poleshes occupies something that does not even belong to them. The Romans changed the name of Judea, or Israel, to Palestine 136 years after the birth of Yeshua, to punish the Jewish nation after their unsuccessful rebellion. It's the Romans in 125 AD that used the term Palestine. But actually the name they gave it was Syria Palestina in 125 AD. Palestina meant homeland of the Philistines. The Philistines now only occupied a thin strip by the Gaza Strip, by the way. And then they went extinct. Some people say their origins were from the Isle of Crete. Nevertheless, I've been to a settlement right in the heart of Tel Aviv, a settlement of Philistines along the Sharon Strip. And this is, you can visit at the Eretz Israel Museum today. But Palestine meant that there were no Jews, and it was purposely labeled that way to disgrace and to drive out the Jewish population that lived under the occupation of the Romans. It was an offense. It was done purposely, and it was blasphemous in the sight of God. Now, throughout the centuries, there never was a political or administrative nation-state known as Palestine. It was only revived by the British in 1920, who seized it from the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Now, the Arab historian named Philip Hitti in 1920 said there is no such thing as Palestine in history. That's coming from an Arab historian. He said absolutely not, and he testified to this fact in 1946. The name Palestine was artificial. Yes, Zahir Hussein said, yes, the existence of a separate Palestinian identity exists only for tactical reasons. Interesting he would say that. The establishment of a Palestinian state is a new tool to continue the fight against Israel and to bring the Arabs together in unity, of which has never happened, by the way. So in 1875, it's important to understand that the area now Israel was only 300,000 people, inhabitants. It was practically empty. And that's how travelers described it. Even Mark Twain said these words about it, quote, "In the Jezreel Valley, there wasn't a single village to be found." Palestine had been laid waste under the Turkish Ottoman Empire. In fact, by the way, if you don't know this, every tree that somebody had on their property, you would have to pay a tax to the Turks. That's right. And so the valleys were robbed of its topsoil. Now, there were already large Jewish populations in Jerusalem, by the way, in such places as the Galilee, Safat, which is a religious capital in the north of Israel, etc. And in 1878, the Turkish Ottoman Sultan had an immigration policy which brought many of the Arabs who belonged to tribes in the area. If you've ever seen Lawrence of Arabia, you'll remember historically what was going on. That means there is no 1,000-year history of Palestinian peoples. In fact, it was the Jews that were settling on these barren lands. And the Arab owners of lands legitimately that they had, they were not forced ever to sell their land to the Jews, but in fact they sold barren lands, deserted, destroyed barren lands to Jews at extortionist prices, of which we paid. I guess believing in God's promises and His word. So what about these so-called Palestinian leaders who have been sapping the economy of its own people and keeping them downtrodden and poor? Let me just give you a few of these leaders throughout this, quote, Palestinian Arab history of only recent decades. Khalil Mashal, one of the leaders of Hamas, has amassed a $12 billion fortune. Yasser Arafat, who passed away, who was the founder of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, when he died, had amassed a fortune of $11 billion, most of which ended up in his wife's hands. Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, $3.5 billion, and Mahmoud Abbas, the present president of the PLO, or the Palestinian Authority, worth at least $1.5 billion. No wonder he doesn't want any elections to take place. But you see, what I'm saying is they keep their own people down in the gutter in order to keep them in poverty and to use them just as they have been throughout the decades. The word Palestina comes from the word which is connected to liflosh, to occupy the land that was not even theirs. You can look it up for yourself, by the way. So people expect to resolve a conflict without neutralizing the root cause of that conflict by programming their own people and future generations to hate. You see, they send little children in kindergarten. They send them off to summer camps to hate the Jews. They give them rubber knives as if they're attacking to kill Jewish people they had never met in their lives. This is the kind of hate they're driving towards it, and this is why I cannot understand why President Biden and his administration is paying once again to UNRWA and to the Palestinian Authority hundreds of thousands of dollars in aid when that aid is going to support terrorists and their salaries. No realistic solution can ever be found with a culture of hate and the brainwashing of an entire generation. The world's fanaticism of a two-state solution is treated as a magic pill, as a magic solution. But most of the world will just keep on blaming Israel. We signed a peace accords with Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, and the former president of Israel, Shimon Peres, on September 13, 1993, 29 years ago, and we're no closer to peace with these so-called Palestinian Arabs who are sitting at our doorstep as a Trojan horse than we were back then. In fact, they've never renounced in their covenant the destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and that's a fact. Look it up for yourself. So let us remember, the Jews accepted the UN partition plan in 1947. The Palestinians, they would have received a much bigger state than what exists today. However, all the Arab states at that time came against Israel, and they were convinced that the Palestinian Arabs would overrun the Jews, and therefore they left their homes only to never come back again, because God's word says, I will bless those that bless thee and curse those that curse thee. Now, in conclusion, let me give you my own take on this. I love the Arab peoples. I have many friends who are Arab Christians and Arab Muslims. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. To the Jews, to the Arabs, and to all peoples. This is not the issue at all. But we must come down to the present reality and understand the historical facts as they really are. And I like what was said by Danny Dayan. He said, if partition of this contested land was ever the just solution to the conflict, it ceased the moment one side refused. It was not a mere rejection. They launched repeated assaults to take it all by force. Returning Israel to its indefensible 9-mile wasteland would once again place us in mortal danger while rewarding the aggressor. In Judea and Samaria, there is ample room for many Jews, many Palestinians, and peaceful coexistence. You wouldn't believe how the economy can do so well if that happens. After 20 years of failed attempts to reach a two-state solution, isn't it time we admit our failures and move on? Yeah, I think so. The time has come to invest in new, innovative paths to peace that unite people through the acts of mutual respect. Now, I think what he said was very well said and very well written. And I'd also like to conclude with a statement that the former Arkansas governor, Mike Huckabee, also said, who has come repeatedly to Israel, loves the Jewish people, loves the Arabs, and has come and blessed Israel. He said these words, I realize that for the past several years, there has been both on the Democratic and Republican side the notion that we will be able to achieve Middle East peace by something called the two-state solution. I want to be on record, and I know that this would not even be agreeable to some of you because there are many Republicans who think that the two-state solution is in fact the solution. I consider it no solution whatsoever. There cannot be two states polling for the same piece of real estate, especially when one of those states does not believe the other one even has a right to exist, much less exist peacefully. You can't have two governments wanting to own the same piece of real estate. So why don't we leave it in the hands of the government to whom it was originally given, and why don't we leave it into the hands of those who will protect not only the antiquities, but respect the religions not only of the Jews, but also of the Muslims and of the Christians. And with that on VFI News, I welcome you to write in your comments, your questions. I invite you to share this with your friends. Get on board, sign up, and give us a thumbs up, a like, and subscribe to VFI News. God bless you and shalom from the Holy Land, the city of Jerusalem, the nation of Israel.